Hello, wisdom seekers. Welcome to another lesson. I've said that so many weeks in a row, I'm thinking about just recording that and have you listen to that instead of having it repeated each week. But we are still in Luke and studying the parables of Jesus. Before we begin, we want to go over our prayer board. We want to be remembering Miss Gertie and Don and Jody Ashby as they continue with health issues for Gertie, and knowing that there's going to be more doctor visits and health concerns that they're going to have to be dealing with. It's a very prayerful situation. We want to also continue praying for Sheila's uncle, beloved uncle. His name is Scott, and he is going through chemo for a very aggressive cancer. And I know that this is a very upsetting thing for their family. Dwayne and Doris Bowling, we want to keep them in prayer as he is going to have an upcoming heart surgery, a triple bypass, either the 22nd or the 25th, I believe, of March. So please remember Doris and Dwayne Bowling. We also have a praise report for Laura DeFore's brother, who went through successful back surgery, and we know that that is a very big praise report. So we appreciate your prayers on that. So we are continuing in Luke, and we are in Luke 15 today. Last week we had the wonderful study of the Good Samaritan, and this week we are going to have another parable. Luke 15 has a trio of parables, and they all declare God's love for the lost and his joy over the found. We have the parable of the lost sheep that was sought, even though he had the 99 that was safely in the fold, and how he rejoiced when he found the woman who lost the coin, how she searched until she found the one missing coin and celebrated and rejoiced. This week's study focuses on the familiar lost son, or the prodigal son, and how much we miss on this parable if we really concentrate only on the prodigal son, the lost son, because there are several people in this parable. And as I said last week, Jesus never put anything in a parable that was to be tossed aside without studying, because they all have some very important meanings to it. The passage today picks up in the middle of the story. As we know, the younger son had asked for his inheritance, even though his father was very much alive. This was almost unheard of. His arrogance was played out in squandering everything by sinful living. The King James Version says riotous living. In his poverty, he ended up in a pig pen. And for a Jewish man, this is a very hard consequence indeed. So finally, he is returning to his father, humble and repentant. And that's where we pick up the story in the scriptures today in 15, 20, 21. So he got up and he went to his father. But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." He got up. This is almost like a metaphor of he spiritually woke up. He got up. He was going to come back to the Father with a totally different frame of mind. He went to his father not expecting to pick up where he left off naturally. He was not haughty. He was very meek as he was returning. understanding in this parable that the Father is representing God, we observe that God is joyfully receiving any sinner who repents and faithfully returns to him. It's a magnificent portrait of God's love as the Father, that he ran and threw his arms around him and kissed his neck. It's just a joyous picture. True to his plan, the Son spoke the words he had rehearsed in the pig pen. He did not try to rationalize his behavior. He did not try to blame anybody else for his behavior. And he confessed what he had done, that he had sinned against heaven, against God himself, and against the Father, who is God in this parable. And in 20 through 24, but the Father told the servants, quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandal on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it. And let's celebrate with a feast, because the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. The son had wanted to ask to be one of the hired hands, but before he could even complete that statement, the father quickly changed the tone altogether. Joy just flowed from the father's instruction, perhaps tears running down his face as he spoke of the son being dead and now alive, and lost and now found. So the household, they began to celebrate. Joy then filled the house. I would imagine it had been a long time since joy had filled this household. This part of the story alone is a lesson really all of in itself, because each one of us, perhaps some more than others, having a greater testimony, have gone into a far country spiritually. They've gone, wandered away from God further than they realize, away from the one true source, God himself. He calls us back to turn from sin and come back to him, back to finally accept him as his Father. And if we are Christians, if we have wandered away spiritually, say to a far country, he accepts wayward Christians who have wandered from the light, and he never ceases to have been our Father all along. But we have to turn back. We have to turn back to him. But he joyfully welcomes us back. We could stop right here, but we know that these verses go on to bring in another prodigal, one that is just as lost as the one that we had been talking about. But this one didn't know it, because he was counting on his works to be accepted. Works-related salvation, it always brings in comparison between you and me. I do more, you do more. I'm better than you, you're better than me. All of these that bring in almost a competition within church activities or between people, and that is not what it's supposed to be about at all. So in 25 and 27, we see the other prodigal being brought in to our lesson. Now his older son was in the field. As he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants, questioning what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. He's coming back from the fields. Now this son, I can't even imagine what he thought when he heard this music, and evidently from the sound he could hear that people were dancing. This wasn't a normal sound from this household at all, and he's probably wondering who could be visiting that it was causing all of this commotion. So he summons one of the servants to find out. This servant probably thought he was going to be telling this other son some joyful news about that his father has killed this fattened calf and that his brother is back safe and sound. All of these things that he thought the brother was going to start rejoicing as well. This safe and sound here is interesting because it is saying that the father knows that the son has come back to his senses. The safe and sound here. He's come back to be the son that the father has always wanted him to be, and that's another reason that they're all rejoicing. So that's truly the lost has been found because he's come to his senses. So now we really get to the verses that I consider to be just straight, that's not fair verses. And if you've ever been in this situation to where you feel that's not fair, and sometimes we even say that to God, these verses are for you to help us get in this meat and understand, because it's so easy to be this other son. Now he became angry and didn't want to go in. So the father came out and pleaded with him. But he replied to his father, "Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." Now, if you can read through the lines, I don't think you have to even do that. This is definitely that's not fair verses, isn't it? This is a son that has lost it, and he is, I think, talking very rudely to the father. He won't even go into the house. Evidently the servant went in and the father came back out and pleads with his son. You can tell from these passages how self-centered the son was by this time. He was focusing on all of the wrongs done to him, or basically all of the wrongs he perceived that had been done to him. Look at this. I have been slaving many years. This is grudging obedience. I have never disobeyed. This is self-righteousness. It always feels like, look at all I have done. You never gave me even a goat to celebrate with my friends. So when this son of yours, no mention that it's his brother, who devoured your assets with prostitutes. If you will notice in the translations, there's never any mention of prostitutes. That he is embellishing on that. It does say riotous living, sinful living, but it never says prostitutes. Interesting. When he devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. You almost think at the end of these verses, you're wondering why it didn't say, how could you do this to me? Because he felt so wronged. It's the elder brother who is representing a Pharisee attitude, and all others who think works is the report card. The report card that God looks at. We have to be so cautious with this. We have to be so cautious with this. I see myself in these verses a lot. And it has humbled me to look at this to make sure that I never do this. We have to know that God does not owe us anything for the works that we do in His name or the years of service. If we're doing it to be recognized, it almost becomes that we get jealous that God doesn't seem to be paying as much attention to us maybe as to someone else. That can get very, very dangerous, can it? It happens when the attitudes, unintended maybe gossip, it can be like a parasite on people and within a church, really, if it's left unmentioned, talking behind people's back when we don't agree with a lifestyle and we think we live by a higher standard than they do. This is extremely toxic, and it's really saying that you don't believe they deserve God's grace. And that is when you are saying you don't really understand God's grace, because that's not how it works, does it? And that's why I believe that this is just one of the most important parables that Jesus ever taught. And it is because of the older son that we need to really pay attention to this. In 31 and 32, beautiful verses that we need to pick apart and look at. Son, he said to him, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. What beautiful verses. There's two parts of rejoicing in here. This is God rejoicing and celebrating for you and me. He wants us to know that the faithful Christian who loves the Lord and is working for the right reasons, that this grace from God, it is with us all the time. We're filled up with it all the time, whether we know it or not. We can realize it or we can not realize it and lose the benefit of the grace. But this is also God celebrating and rejoicing for the ones that are lost and that are found. It's both. The ones that have it and the ones that don't, but come back and come to Him and then receive it. We can be prodigals in the pig pen like the first son, or we can be prodigals in the palace like the second son. God rejoices when either one of these prodigals come home, and that's God's grace. That's His grace working. One thing we can all do personally is examine our own hearts with these statements. I am more like the younger brother when I have these attitudes. And you can fill those in for you. I am more like the older brother when I have these attitudes. But always ending with the statement, I need the Lord every day because I have the tendency to have these attitudes, whether from the older or the younger brother. God's perspective is certainly a different perspective from ours. We often get caught in traps of maybe materialism, trying to gain things. We put the emphasis on doing, where God places the emphasis on being real. We put the emphasis on accomplishment, but God puts the emphasis on character. He wants the accomplishments for us, but He looks at the character behind the accomplishments. In the sight of God, being real is so much more important than for anybody being noticed. It's the person, it's the character. That's what he's looking for. We can really truly give thanks every day to the Lord for the forgiveness that he gives us when we humbly ask, or when we do act human, because we are human and we can get caught with a younger son attitude or an older son attitude. But the wonderful part about that is that Jesus became a human so he could understand and sympathize. That's why we have such a great God. He understands and sympathizes when we do falter, and that's why he is there to forgive us when we ask for that forgiveness. This was such a wonderful lesson. I so enjoyed the study of this because you find something new in these parables. I noticed in reading about the lost sheep and the lost coin, and then the prodigal son, the lost son coming home, that each one of these, the person celebrated. They each wanted to celebrate. And that's what we're doing today. We're celebrating being able to study these passages. I love you, Wisdom Seeker, and I'm so thankful that you joined me and that you studied with me. I love you.